Marcus Thornfield stood at the massive windows of his ranch house, watching the storm clouds gather like dark promises across the Montana sky. At 52, he had everything money could buy: 10,000 acres of prime land, prize-winning cattle, and a house that looked more like a luxury hotel than a home. But as the thunder rolled across the plains, he felt the familiar emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. The divorce had been finalized 3 years ago. Sarah had taken half of everything, including their 2 children who now lived in Seattle with their mother. They called once a month, awkward conversations that left Marcus feeling more alone than before. His ex-wife had been right about one thing: he had chosen the ranch over his family. Now he had the ranch, and they were gone. The first drops of rain splattered against the window as Marcus poured himself another whiskey. It was only 4 in the afternoon, but what did it matter? There was no one to judge him, no one to care. His nearest neighbor lived 12 miles away, and his ranch hands went home to their families every evening. The silence in the house was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. Lightning split the sky, followed by a crack of thunder that shook the windows. This was going to be a bad one. Marcus had lived in Montana long enough to read the signs. The storm would probably knock out power lines and flood the lower pastures. He'd have repair work for days afterward. As if summoned by his thoughts, his phone rang. It was Tom Bradley, his foreman. "Boss, we got a problem," Tom's voice crackled through the static. "That section of fence along Miller's Creek, the storm's hitting it hard. If it goes down, we'll lose half the herd to the ravine." Marcus rubbed his temples. Miller's Creek bordered the most dangerous part of his property, where the ground dropped away into a steep gorge. If the cattle got spooked and ran in that direction, he'd lose animals worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. "I'll head out and check it," Marcus said. "In this weather?" "Boss, that's crazy. Nobody should be out in this storm." But Marcus was already reaching for his rain gear. "I've got the best truck and the best equipment. I'll be fine. You stay put with your family." Tom started to protest, but Marcus hung up. The truth was, he almost welcomed the danger. It was better than sitting alone in his empty house, counting his money and his regrets. Marcus pulled on his heavy-duty rain jacket and boots. His truck was a custom-built Ford F450, designed to handle the worst Montana weather. As he climbed into the cab, another lightning bolt lit up the sky like daylight. The rain was coming down in sheets now, so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. The drive to Miller's Creek normally took 20 minutes. Tonight, it took almost an hour. The ranch roads had turned into rivers of mud, and twice Marcus had to use his truck's winch to pull himself out of washed-out sections. By the time he reached the fence line, the storm was in full fury. Marcus parked the truck and grabbed his high-powered flashlight. The beam cut through the rain, revealing what he'd feared: a section of fence posts had been undermined by the flooding creek. The wire was sagging dangerously, and in several places it had snapped completely. If the cattle came this way in their panic, nothing would stop them from going over the edge. He was examining the worst damage when his flashlight caught something that made him freeze. There was someone else out there in the storm. A figure in dark clothing was working on the fence, about 50 yards away. Marcus blinked, sure he was hallucinating. Who would be crazy enough to be out here in weather like this? But as he watched, the figure moved with purpose, clearly trying to repair the broken fence. Marcus started walking toward them, his boots splashing through the rising water. The closer he got, the more amazed he became. Someone was actually fixing his fence in the middle of a dangerous storm, using what looked like handmade tools. "Hey!" Marcus shouted over the wind and rain. "Hey, you out there?" The figure turned toward his voice but didn't stop working. Marcus could see now that it was a woman, though everything else was hidden under a dark hood and layers of soaked clothing. She had managed to reset one of the fallen posts and was working on restringing the wire. Marcus approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. When he was close enough to be heard without yelling, he called out, "Ma'am, what are you doing out here?" The woman looked up, and Marcus's flashlight briefly illuminated her face. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe in her 30s, with sharp green eyes and muddy brown hair plastered to her head. There was something fierce in her expression, a determination that reminded him of the wild horses that sometimes roamed his property. "Your fence was broken," she said simply, as if that explained everything. Her voice had a slight accent he couldn't place. "The cattle will die if they fall." "You're on private property," Marcus said, though without any real anger. He was too amazed by what he was seeing. "How did you even know about the fence?" The woman secured the wire to the post with quick, practiced movements. "I was sheltering in the old barn down the road. I saw your truck go by and figured you were heading to check the damage. When I saw how bad it was, I started working." Marcus shone his light on the repairs she'd made. They were crude but effective, the kind of field fixes that would hold until proper repairs could be made. She'd used baling wire and wooden stakes that looked like they'd been carved by hand. "You know fence work," he observed. "I know a lot of things." She moved to the next damaged section. "Are you going to help, or just stand there watching?" Something in her tone stung Marcus's pride. Here was this mysterious woman, soaked to the skin and working in dangerous conditions to save his cattle, while he stood around asking questions. He set down his flashlight and reached for his tools. For the next 2 hours they worked side by side in the storm. The woman she never offered her name proved to know more about emergency fence repair than some of his experienced ranch hands. She seemed to understand exactly what needed to be done, and how to do it with minimal resources. Marcus found himself stealing glances at her as they worked. Despite the terrible conditions, she never complained or suggested they give up. When a particularly large section of fence collapsed, threatening to undo all their progress, she simply rolled up her sleeves and started over. "Where did you learn to do this?" Marcus asked as they secured the last of the emergency repairs. "Here and there," she answered vaguely. "You pick things up when you have to." The storm was finally beginning to ease, though rain still fell steadily. Marcus's flashlight revealed their handiwork. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold. His cattle were safe. "I owe you," Marcus said. "Those cattle represent a year's income. If they'd gone over that cliff—" The woman gathered up her makeshift tools. "No payment needed. I was just helping. At least let me drive you back to wherever you're staying. That barn you mentioned, it's not safe in weather like this." For the first time, the woman hesitated. In that moment of silence, Marcus heard something in the wind that made his blood run cold. It was the sound of rushing water, much louder than it should be. "The creek's rising," the woman said, confirming his fears. "We need to get to higher ground." Marcus grabbed his flashlight and played it across the landscape. What he saw made his heart race. Miller's Creek, normally a gentle stream, had become a raging torrent. The water was already knee-deep where they stood and rising fast. "My truck?" Marcus said, but when he looked toward where he'd parked, there was nothing but churning brown water. The vehicle had been swept away or was underwater. The woman was already moving, heading for a small hill about a quarter-mile away. "This way," she called. "Hurry." They ran through the rising flood, slipping and stumbling on the muddy ground. The water was up to their waists by the time they reached the hill. Marcus's expensive boots filled with muddy water, and his custom rain gear was no better than the woman's makeshift clothing. They climbed the hill and found a cluster of large rocks that provided some shelter from the wind. Marcus checked his phone. No signal. They were completely cut off, surrounded by floodwater that showed no signs of receding. "Well," Marcus said, trying to inject some humor into the situation, "this is turning into quite an adventure." The woman pulled her hood back, revealing her face fully for the first time. She was prettier than Marcus had realized, with strong features and intelligent eyes. But there was something guarded in her expression, as if she was used to being careful around people. "Adventure," she repeated with a slight smile. "That's one word for it." They sat in relative silence for a while, listening to the storm and watching the floodwater swirl below them. Marcus found himself studying his mysterious companion. Her clothes were worn but clean, patched in several places but mended with obvious skill. She carried herself with the confidence of someone used to handling difficult situations. "I never got your name," Marcus said finally. "Elena," she answered after a moment's hesitation. "Elena Rodriguez." Marcus Thornfield. This is my rancho was before it turned into a lake. Elena smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her entire face. The water will go down. It always does. You sound like you speak from experience. I've seen a few floods. Elena pulled her knees up to her chest, trying to conserve warmth. Despite the summer weather, the combination of rain and wind was making the night uncomfortably cold. Marcus shrugged out of his rain jacket. 3 days after the storm, Marcus found himself driving the back roads of his ranch for the 4th time that morning. He told himself he was checking for flood damage, but the truth was harder to admit. He was looking for Elena Rodriguez. The woman had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Marcus had driven to every barn, shed, and abandoned building within 20 miles of Miller's Creek. He'd asked Tom Bradley and the other ranch hands if they'd seen anyone matching Elena's description. He'd even stopped at the few neighboring ranches to inquire about a woman traveling alone. Nothing. It was as if Elena had materialized from the storm itself, saved his cattle, and then dissolved back into the Montana air. But Marcus couldn't forget her, the fierce determination in her green eyes, the skilled way she'd worked the fence, the careful way she'd answered his questions. On Thursday morning, Marcus was driving past the Clearwater General Store when he spotted something that made him slam on the brakes. Through the window, he could see a familiar figure, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a jacket that looked suspiciously like the one he'd given Elena. Marcus parked and walked into the store, trying to appear casual. Elena was at the counter, counting out coins to pay for a small bag of supplies. She looked up as the door chimed, and their eyes met across the narrow store. "Mr. Thornfield," she said quietly. "Elena." Marcus tried to keep the relief out of his voice. "I was hoping I'd run into you again." Elena finished her transaction with the elderly store clerk and gathered her purchases. "How are the fence repairs coming along?" "Good. Your emergency work held perfectly." Marcus gestured toward the door. "Could I buy you a cup of coffee? There's a diner next door." Elena hesitated, clearly torn between politeness and her obvious desire to leave. "I don't want to take up your time." "You wouldn't be. I was hoping to thank you properly for what you did the other night." After a moment, Elena nodded. "Okay, a quick coffee." The Clearwater Diner was a typical small-town establishment, vinyl booths, laminated menus, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Marcus ordered pie with his coffee, but Elena asked for just the coffee, black. "You sure you don't want something to eat?" Marcus asked. "The pie here is famous in 3 counties." "Coffee's fine," Elena said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Marcus studied her more carefully in the diner's bright lights. She looked thinner than he remembered, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes were clean but clearly worn, and he noticed she'd removed the price tags from several items that looked newly purchased, probably what she'd bought at the general store. "So," Marcus said carefully, "are you enjoying your visit to our area?" Elena's smile was guarded. "It's beautiful country. Where are you staying?" The question seemed to make Elena uncomfortable. She sipped her coffee and looked out the window. "Around? That's pretty vague. I like to keep moving." Marcus sensed he was approaching dangerous territory, but something compelled him to push a little harder. "Elena, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you okay?" "I mean, really okay." Elena's green eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "The other night you mentioned staying in an old barn. That doesn't sound like accommodations most people would choose." "I'm fine," Elena said firmly. "I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can." "But that doesn't mean you should have to." Elena stood abruptly. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Thornfield, but I should go." "Wait." Marcus reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. It's just you helped me when you didn't have to. I'd like to return the favor if I can." Elena sat back down slowly, but her posture remained tense. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's gratitude." Marcus leaned back in his booth. "Look, I live alone in a house big enough for 20 people. I've got more guest rooms than I know what to do with. If you need a place to stay for a few days, I can't do that. Why not? Elena stared into her coffee cup. You don't know anything about me. I know you risked your life to save my cattle. I know you work harder than most people I employ. I know you're smart and capable and Marcus paused, searching for the right words. And I know you're in some kind of trouble. Elena looked up sharply. What makes you say that? Experience. I've been around long enough to recognize someone who's running from something. For a long moment, Elena didn't respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm not running from the law, if that's what you're thinking. I never thought you were. Then what? Marcus shrugged. Could be anything. Bad relationship. Job loss, family problems. Could be you just wanted a change of scenery. It doesn't matter to me. Elena studied his face intently as if trying to decide how much to trust him. Why do you care? It was a fair question, and Marcus took a moment to consider his answer honestly. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe because I've been alone for a long time, and I recognize the signs in someone else. Maybe because you helped me when you didn't have to. Maybe because I have plenty of space and resources, and you clearly need both, and what would you want in return? The blunt question caught Marcus off guard. Nothing. I mean it, nothing. No strings, no expectations? Just a safe place to rest for as long as you need it. Elena's laugh was bitter. Men don't usually make offers like that without wanting something. This one does. They sat in silence for several minutes. The diner's background noise, clinking dishes, muted conversations, the hiss of the coffee maker filling the space between them. Marcus could see Elena struggling with herself, weighing her options. If I said yes, she said carefully, it would be temporary. Just until I figure out my next move, of course. And I'd want to work. I don't accept handouts. Marcus felt a surge of hope. I always have work that needs doing around the ranch. Elena nodded slowly. What kind of work? Fence maintenance, barn repairs, equipment cleaning. Nothing too complicated, but it's honest work. What would you pay? Whatever's fair. We can figure out the details. Elena finished her coffee and set the mug down with a decisive click. Okay, but I want to be clear about something. This is a business arrangement. Nothing more. Understood? And if I decide to leave, I leave? No questions, no arguments. Agreed. Elena stood again, but this time she didn't seem to be fleeing. When would you want me to start? How about now? I can show you around the place, get you settled in one of the guest rooms. I need to collect my things first. Where are they? Elena hesitated. Not far? I can meet you at your ranch this afternoon? Marcus pulled out a business card and wrote his address on the back. Do you know how to get there? I'll find it. As they left the diner, Marcus felt lighter than he had in months. For the first time since his divorce, he was looking forward to having another person in his house. It didn't matter that Elena was essentially a stranger or that she was clearly hiding something. She was real, she was capable, and she was coming to his ranch that afternoon. Marcus found himself cleaning house with more energy than he'd shown in years. He chose a guest room on the main floor, one with its own bathroom and a view of the mountains. He stocked the refrigerator with food, made sure the coffee maker was working, and even put fresh flowers from his mother's old garden in the room. Elena arrived just before sunset, carrying a single duffel bag that looked like it contained everything she owned. She stood at his front door looking small and uncertain, a far cry from the fierce woman who'd battled the storm 3 nights earlier. Elena, Marcus said, opening the door wide. Welcome. She stepped inside, her eyes taking in the high ceilings, expensive furnishings, and Western art that decorated the entryway. This is quite a place. It's too big for one person, Marcus said honestly. Come on, let me show you to your room. As they walked through the house, Marcus found himself seeing it through Elena's eyes. The place was beautiful but sterile, more like a showroom than a home. There were no family photos, no personal touches that spoke of the people who lived there. Here's your room, Marcus said, opening the door to the guest suite. Private bathroom, cable TV, mini fridge. Make yourself at home. Elena set down her bag and walked to the window. The view looked out over the ranch's main pasture, where cattle grazed peacefully in the evening light. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Dinner's at 7 if you're interested." "Nothing fancy, I'm not much of a cook." Elena turned from the window. "Mr. Thornfield, Marcus, please." "Marcus, I want you to know I appreciate this. More than you probably realize." There was something in her tone that made Marcus study her face more carefully. In the soft light of the guest room, he could see the exhaustion she'd been hiding, the relief of finally having a safe place to rest. "How long has it been since you had a real bed?" he asked gently. Elena's composure cracked slightly. "A while." Marcus wanted to ask more questions. How long exactly, where she'd been sleeping, what had brought her to this point. But something in Elena's expression warned him that she'd reached her limit for personal revelations. "Well, you have one now," he said simply. "Get some rest. We can talk about work arrangements tomorrow." That evening, Marcus cooked steaks on his outdoor grill while Elena explored the ranch grounds. He watched her through the kitchen window. She joined him for dinner on the... 6 weeks later, Marcus stood at the same window where he'd watched the storm approach, but everything had changed. The house no longer felt empty. The smell of fresh coffee and homemade bread drifted from the kitchen, and he could hear Elena humming softly as she prepared breakfast. Elena had transformed, more than just the atmosphere of his home. In the weeks since she'd arrived, she'd proven to be the most capable worker he'd ever employed. She'd repaired fences that had been neglected for years, organized the equipment barn with military precision, and even helped design a new watering system for the cattle that would save thousands of dollars in maintenance costs. But more than that, she'd brought life back to the ranch and to Marcus himself. "Good morning," Elena said as he entered the kitchen. She was standing at the stove, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a work shirt. She looked healthy now. The dark circles under her eyes had disappeared and she'd put on weight. The haunted look she'd carried when she first arrived had been replaced by something Marcus could only call contentment. "Morning," Marcus replied, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Smells like you've been busy. I made extra bread for Tom's family. His wife mentioned her oven was broken." Elena flipped the eggs expertly. "I hope that's okay." "Of course it's okay. It's your bread." Elena smiled at that. Over the weeks, Marcus had watched her slowly accept that she belonged here, that this was her home too, at least for now. It had been a gradual process. Elena had been so used to having nothing that she'd been afraid to claim even the smallest comforts. They ate breakfast together on the back porch, as had become their custom. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the mountains stood out sharp and clear against the blue sky. "I talked to the bank yesterday," Elena said as she buttered a slice of toast. Marcus looked up from his eggs. Elena had been working on rebuilding her credit and financial standing, a process that required patience and careful planning. "Good news? They approved my application for a secured credit card. It's a small limit, but it's a start." Marcus felt a surge of pride. He'd watched Elena work toward this moment, saving every penny from her wages, researching financial recovery strategies, making careful plans for her future. She approached rebuilding her life with the same determination she'd shown fixing his fence in the storm. "That's fantastic. Elena, you've worked hard for this. I couldn't have done it without a stable address and steady income." Elena met his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you giving me a chance." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Even after 6 weeks, Elena's gratitude sometimes made him feel awkward. He'd given her a job and a place to stay, but she'd given him something far more valuable: purpose and companionship. "You've more than earned everything you've received," Marcus said. "The work you've done around here is worth 10 times what I'm paying you." Elena laughed. "Now you're just being ridiculous." "I'm serious. Tom told me yesterday that you're the best worker he's ever supervised. He asked if you'd be willing to take on more responsibility overseeing some of the seasonal help." Elena looked surprised. "He said that?" "He said you have a natural understanding of ranch operations and a gift for teaching others. He wants to promote you to assistant foreman. What do you think?" Marcus studied her face. I think you'd be excellent at it. The question is whether you want to take it on. Elena was quiet for a moment, staring out at the pastures where the cattle grazed peacefully. It would mean staying longer. Yes, it would. I told you when I came here that this was temporary. Marcus felt his heart sink slightly. He'd been dreading this conversation, knowing it would come eventually. Elena had always been clear that she was just passing through, rebuilding her life before moving on to whatever came next. I remember, Marcus said carefully. But sometimes temporary arrangements turn into something more permanent. Elena looked at him intently. Is that what you want? For me to stay permanently? It was a direct question, and Marcus decided to give her a direct answer. Yes, I want you to stay. Why? Marcus set down his coffee cup and chose his words carefully. Because this place is better with you in it. Because you've brought life back to a house that was more like a museum. Because you're the first person in years who sees me as more than just my bank account. Marcus ... I'm not asking for anything more than what we have, Marcus said quickly. I know you're still healing from what your ex-husband put you through. I'm not trying to rush you into anything. I just want you to know that you have a home here for as long as you want it. Elena stood and walked to the porch railing, her back to him. In the 2 months before I came here, I slept in my car, in shelters, in abandoned buildings. I ate 1 meal a day when I was lucky to when I could afford it. I applied for dozens of jobs and was turned down for all of them because I had no permanent address. Marcus listened without interrupting. I told myself that if I could just find steady work, I could rebuild my life, but I never imagined I'd find this. Elena turned to face him. I never imagined I'd find someone who would give me a chance without asking for anything in return. You don't owe me anything, Elena. I know. That's what makes it so remarkable. Elena returned to her chair. When David left me, he said I was worthless. That no one would ever want me, that I'd never amount to anything on my own. Marcus felt anger flare in his chest. He was wrong. I know that now. But for a long time I believed him. Even after I started working here, part of me kept waiting for you to decide he was right, to find some reason to throw me out. That's never going to happen. Elena smiled, and Marcus saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before: hope. Real hope? Not just the desperate determination to survive, but genuine optimism about the future. I want to stay, she said simply. I want to take the promotion, build a real life here. But I want to be clear about one thing. I'm not staying out of gratitude or because I don't think I have other options. I'm staying because I want to be here. Marcus felt relief flood through him. Good, that's exactly how I hoped you'd feel. There's something else, Elena said, and her tone made Marcus look up sharply. I'm going to divorce David officially. I've been putting it off because I couldn't afford a lawyer, but I've been saving money. It's time to close that chapter completely. Do you need help with the legal costs? Elena shook her head. I need to do this myself. It's important to me that I handle it on my own. Marcus understood. Elena's independence was crucial to her healing process. She needed to know she could take care of herself before she could truly move forward. There's a good lawyer in Billings, Marcus offered. Sarah used him for our divorce. He's fair and competent. Thank you. I'll look into it. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, both processing the conversation they'd just had. Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Elena was staying. She was making the ranch her home, not just a temporary refuge, that afternoon. Marcus found Elena in the equipment barn, teaching 2 new seasonal workers how to properly maintain the ranch's hay balers. She was patient but firm, demonstrating each step and making sure they understood the safety procedures. Remember, she was telling them, this equipment is expensive, but more importantly, it's dangerous if you don't treat it with respect. Always follow the lockout procedures before you start any maintenance work. Marcus watched from the doorway, impressed by her natural leadership abilities. The 2 young men clearly respected her expertise, asking questions and taking notes as she spoke. Boss! One of them called when he spotted Marcus. Elena's teaching us more in one afternoon than I learned in my first month at my last job. She's good at what she does, Marcus agreed, after the workers went home for the day. Marcus and Elena walked the fence line where they'd first met during the storm. The fence had been completely rebuilt since then, stronger and more durable than before. Hard to believe it was only 6 weeks ago, Elena said, running her hand along the smooth wire. Feels longer, Marcus replied. In a good way. Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. Marcus, I want you to know something. What you did for me, giving me a chance when I had nothing, it changed my life. Not just because of the job and the place to stay, but because you showed me that there are still good people in the world. Elena, let me finish. Elena stepped closer to him. I was so broken when I came here. Not just financially, but emotionally. I didn't trust anyone, especially men. I thought the only way to survive was to keep moving, never get attached. Never let anyone get close enough to hurt me again. Marcus waited, sensing she had more to say. But you've shown me that trust doesn't have to lead to pain. You've given me space to heal without pressure, respect without expectation. You've helped me remember who I am when I'm not afraid. Who are you? Marcus asked softly. Elena smiled, and it was the most beautiful smile Marcus had ever seen. I'm someone who knows how to fix fences in storms. Someone who's not afraid of hard work. Someone who's stronger than she thought she was. As the sun set over the Montana mountains, Marcus realized that the storm that had brought Elena to his fence had given him something he'd never expected, a second chance at happiness. Not just with someone else, but with himself. Elena had arrived with nothing but the determination to survive. Now she,